Most people spend their entire lives trying to be remembered, and that desperation, that quiet hunger to matter, is precisely what makes them forgettable. The ones who leave a mark never chased it. They simply became something worth thinking about, and then they walked away. There is a quiet war happening inside almost every person you know. It is not fought with weapons. It is fought with attention, with approval, with the desperate, unspoken need to feel significant in the eyes of others. Think about this. How many decisions do you make each day that are secretly designed to impress someone? The clothes you wear, the words you choose, the way you sit in a room full of people, the version of yourself you perform when someone important is watching. Most people are not living. They are auditioning. And the tragedy is not that they failed to impress others. The tragedy is that in trying so hard, they erase themselves. They sand down every sharp, interesting edge of their character until nothing remains but a smooth, forgettable surface. Look honestly at your life. How much of what you do is genuinely yours? And how much is a performance written by the fear of what others might think? This is where most people are stuck, not in poverty, not in failure, but in the slow suffocation of living for an audience that is barely even watching. Here is something psychology has understood for decades, but most people never truly absorb. The human brain is wired to seek social belonging with the same urgency it seeks food and water. Rejection to the ancient mind meant exile, and exile meant death. So the nervous system learned to treat social disapproval as a survival threat. This is why criticism feels physical, why silence from someone you respect can ruin an entire day, why being ignored in a room can make you feel invisible in the deepest sense of the word. But you are not living in that ancient world anymore, and yet your reactions are still being written by it. When someone dismisses you, you collapse or you overcompensate. When someone ignores your effort, you either shrink or perform louder. When someone leaves the conversation, you replay it for hours, editing, analyzing, wondering what you did wrong. Pause for a moment. That loop is not wisdom. That loop is survival instinct wearing the mask of self-reflection. The Stoics understood something that most modern self-help books dance around but never say directly. You cannot control how others perceive you. You cannot engineer your way into someone's admiration, and every attempt to do so pulls you further from the one thing that actually creates lasting impact, becoming genuinely, undeniably real. Marcus Aurelius, a man who commanded the most powerful empire in the ancient world, wrote in his private journal, a journal he never intended for anyone to read, these words. He wrote about how little the opinions of men mattered against the backdrop of time. He wrote about how quickly even the greatest names are forgotten. And rather than finding that terrifying, he found it liberating. If everything fades, then the only thing worth building is character, not reputation. Character. Reputation is what others decide about you. Character is what you decide about yourself, and then live quietly, without negotiation. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most influential philosophers in history, taught something that sounds simple until you sit with it long enough. He said that some things are within your control and some things are not. And the entire art of living, the entire discipline of a meaningful life, is learning to tell the difference and acting accordingly. Your actions are yours. Your intentions are yours. Your response to difficulty is yours. What others think of you when you leave the room, that belongs to them. The moment you truly absorb this, not as a concept, but as a way of moving through the world, something shifts. You stop leaking energy into places where it was never yours to spend. Carl Jung spoke about the persona, the mask we construct to navigate the social world. We build it carefully, we polish it, we protect it. But Jung warned that when a person becomes too identified with their persona, they lose contact with their actual self. They become the mask. And a mask, no matter how beautiful, is hollow. This is the trap. And it is extraordinarily common. The person who has curated a perfect image but feels nothing in private. The one who is universally liked but privately unknown, even to themselves. The one who wins every room but goes home to a silence that feels like a verdict. Imagine this situation. You spend years building a version of yourself designed to impress a specific kind of person, a mentor, a peer group. Peer, a romantic ideal. And one day you achieve it. They approve, they admire, they include you. And it feels like nothing. Because the self that was approved of was not you. It was the performance. And applause for a performance does not reach the person standing behind the curtain. So what is the alternative? Not indifference. That is a misreading of Stoicism that produces coldness rather than strength. The shift is this. Move from seeking to be impressive to committing to being genuine. From managing perception to building substance. From performing presence to actually arriving in every conversation, in every room, in every quiet moment when no one is watching. Socrates spent his life asking one question in 100 different forms. What kind of person do you actually want to be? Not what kind of person do you want to be seen as, but who are you beneath the approval and the fear and the carefully constructed image? That question is not comfortable, but it is the only one that leads anywhere worth going. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, the kind that goes deeper than motivation and reaches toward something more lasting, consider subscribing. This channel exists for people who are serious about that kind of inner work. Think about what this looks like in ordinary life. At work, there is always the person who speaks loudly in meetings, who makes sure their contributions are visible, who angles every interaction toward recognition. And then there is the person who simply does the work with care, with precision, with a kind of quiet seriousness that is almost unsettling. Over time, people forget what the first person said, but they remember how the second person made them feel reliable, serious, real. In social situations, the person who is trying hardest to be liked is often the least interesting person in the room, not because they lack intelligence, but because their attention is directed outward, toward how they are landing, rather than inward toward what they actually think and feel. The person who speaks less but means every word they say creates a gravitational pull that no performance can manufacture. And in moments of criticism or competition, the undisciplined person responds immediately, defending, explaining, retaliating, while the grounded person pauses, considers, and chooses their response rather than surrendering to their reaction. That pause is not weakness. That pause is power. Seneca wrote that the greatest empire a person can rule is themselves, not other people's perceptions, not social outcomes. The inner kingdom, the thoughts, the reactions, the values that govern behavior when everything is difficult and no one is watching. Aristotle called this eudaimonia, a word often translated as happiness but more accurately understood as flourishing. A life lived in alignment with your deepest nature and highest capacities. Not a pleasant life, a meaningful one. And meaning, by its nature, does not require an audience. The tree does not grow toward applause. It grows toward light. And it becomes solid not by being seen, but by surviving seasons, by enduring in private what no one around it fully understands. You are not so different. Ask yourself this honestly. When you walk out of a room, what do you want people to feel in your absence? Not think, feel. Because lasting impressions are not made of information. They are made of presence. Ask yourself what you are currently building, not externally, in your career or your image, but internally. What are you becoming in the quiet hours, in the difficult moments, in the conversations where no one will ever know how you chose to behave? Ask yourself whether the version of you that other people see is the version that actually exists, or a careful translation designed to be more palatable, more impressive, more acceptable. And then ask yourself what it would cost you and what it would give you to close that gap. Here's what most people miss about this philosophy. It is not about becoming cold or detached. It is not about not caring. It is about redirecting care from the uncontrollable to the essential. Over time, the person who builds genuine character rather than managed perception develops something rare, a stability that does not depend on external conditions, a confidence that does not crumble under criticism because it was never built on approval, an identity that remains intact when the audience disappears. And paradoxically, inevitably, this is precisely the kind of person that others cannot stop thinking about, not because they tried to leave an impression, but because they were fully unapologetically themselves. And in a world of performances, authenticity is the rarest and most compelling thing a human being can offer. People remember presence. They remember those who seem to need nothing from them while giving something genuine. They remember the ones who walked away without looking back, not out of arrogance, but out of completeness. You do not need to be remembered by everyone. You do not need to impress the room, win the argument, or perform your way into significance. What you need, what requires far more courage, is to become so deeply yourself, so grounded in your own values and presence, that the people who encounter you feel something real, something they cannot quite name, something they find themselves returning to in quiet moments, long after you have gone. Marcus Aurelius asked himself each morning not how he would appear, but how he would act, not what the day would bring, but who he would be within it. That is the practice, invisible to most, transformative to those who attempt it. Walk into rooms with nothing to prove. Speak only when you mean it. Do your work with full seriousness and no performance. And when it is time to leave, leave. Let your absence do what your presence already said. That is not a technique. That is not a strategy for being liked. That is freedom.